Hey everybody, this is Perch. I want to throw a theory by you or an idea. Um, and you may not agree, and it's okay because I don't fully agree with this myself. But I think that there's a case to be made for creators can make some changes that kind of exist in a point of no return for a lot of the comics they work on. And oftentimes we think about these things like, oh, they make Drake gay, and so you can't come back from that. Or John Kent is gay, you can't come back from that. But that's not the kind of plot development or thing I'm talking about. What I'm talking about in terms of an irreversible change is a change, some plot or story element which makes the future comics actually harder to write, or it breaks the fundamentals of what the comic is. A lot of comics and concepts, particularly within both horror and superhero, there's a very fine line behind when kind of like a magic trick. If you show how the trick is made, then you're no longer tricking, you're no longer amazing your audience. Once you know how the saw a lady in half trick works, it's very hard to then be amazed by that trick. You know how it operates. And even if you get too many reveals, just of magic in general, even if you see a new trick, you're looking for how the trick is occurring, not being, amazed by things. It's why, people say like, wonder through the eyes of a child. The child doesn't know all the underpinnings and tricks that go on to how movies are made, or how magic is done, or any of that stuff, and so they can look at it from a pure perspective. So here's my basic concept I'm going to roll out to you, and I'll make the bold statement. I think Jonathan Hickman actually ruins a lot of the comics he works on for other people going forward. And you may think I'm going to talk X-Men and Krakoa, and I definitely think there's an argument to be made there. The second he said, "Hey, let's have the heroes and the villains live together, and let's remove death as something that's going to bother the mutants," it breaks the concept. And what I'm reminded of an interview Hickman made where he said, "Hey, we're just shepherds of these toys, and what we've got to do is be able to put the toys back in the box for future writers to be able to play with them." And I agree very much with that statement. In fact, I think I did a video on that a long time ago. That is how writers should think. But I actually don't think Hickman did that for the comics he worked on. Now, you could argue Fantastic Four, sure, but I'm going to pick on the Avengers here for a second, because I was going back and I was looking at a lot of those kind of first issues of the Avengers and kind of remembering how some of those runs occurred. And if I can give you the broad historical perspective of the Avengers started with this idea that a bunch of, popular, semi-popular heroes got together, and it was kind of the best of the best of the Marvel Universe to some extent. You had the Hulk teaming up with Iron Man, teaming up with Thor, and Captain America was there. And like you had kind of big characters in the Marvel Universe come together to be the Avengers. And for a long time, through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the idea of being invited into the Avengers was a big deal. It's like, oh wow, Spider-Man kept wanting to be in the Avengers, and they would like, I don't know, you're not good enough to be in the Avengers. There was always this kind of it was is a rarefied air that the Avengers got to operate in, and you had to be lucky in order to be a part of it, and that's what the Avengers were. When Hickman came in, he ran basically a storyline that said, "Hey, we need to think bigger. We need to go bigger," and the concept of that made sense. It played with a couple of kind of previous storylines where there was future versions of the Avengers, and even if you remember the Kurt Busiek and George Perez first issue of the Avengers, they had those three issues actually where they were Morgan Le Fay was screwing around with them and everything else. And the fourth issue, it's like, man, what are we going to do with all these Avengers? Because they basically called everybody who'd been an Avenger at some point in the past into one room, and then they're almost, they're making a statement of this is too many. Like they did this little plot, I think in issue 4 of that run, where the Avengers were trying to stop a crime, and they were just tripping all over each other, and they didn't operate well. And people were like, you've got too many Avengers here. You have to specialize. You have to have a honed team in order to be effective, and that was the purpose of that plot. And it also they're basically doing something kind of meta inside those pages. They were saying, we can't stop villains effectively if we're tripping all over each other. But the other thing they were saying is, from a plot perspective, it just doesn't work if you've got villains like the Wrecking Crew shows up to mess up New York. And then suddenly you can have 40 heroes, many of whom are gods with kind of magic and power that could easily annihilate any any villain threat. And not annihilate, that sounds too mean, but basically, the villains lose meaning when you have like, oh, here comes the Gray Gargoyle, and he's facing off against every Avenger ever. It's like even like characters like Doctor Doom, etc. And for years, right, the Avengers more or less followed this format. And then Bendis came in, did his new Avengers bit, same format. They had the Mighty Avengers that came out, same format. They're picking the teams and they're trying to hone it in. Hickman came along and basically did something that, quite frankly, if you've been in a comic shop, a lot of people had asked for. A lot of fans had speculated on it, like, why don't you just have like 40 Avengers and make an Avengers world, and just basically get the best of the best, and the just the whole team there. You could do all kinds of things if you have that. The problem is, and I think Hickman's storyline, the time runs out storyline, it was a good one. Like that was a good run of comics. If you go back and read it, they were enjoyable and fun. And I absolutely enjoyed them at the time. And I enjoyed the Reed Richards with the Secret Avengers, or yeah, that wasn't Secret Avengers, the New Avengers. It was doing the Cabal, that kind of stuff to stop the incursions and everything else. He amped up the stakes to every possible level. Basically, you had a villain team that consisted of like Maximus and Thanos and like every possible villain there, like world breaking villains. You had a threat behind it, which were the realities are going to crash into each other and destroy the entire multiverse. The entire universe is coming to an end. It made sense to have the threats amped up that high, to basically go to, turn it to 11. And so we've got every Avenger ever there. The problem is, once Hickman's storyline was done, once you had Secret Wars and you had all the realities crashing into each other and you had it all happen, then you've got to go back to, comics. You've got to go back to just, now here comes the next story. And the challenge of that is it doesn't work well. You saw Mark Waid go in and he took a run at it for a while. And those comics are forgettable. I mean, I bet for some of you right now listening to this, you're like, I don't remember Mark Waid even doing this. And then you've had Jason Aaron come in. Jason Aaron tried to do a similar thing where it's like, well, I'm not going to have 50 Avengers on the team, but I'm going to create the prehistoric Avengers, and I'm going to create, they're living in the body of a celestial, and they're like he would just throwing crazy shit on the wall. But the problem is, when you're reading these comics, and now you've got Jed McKay there, and they're living in a new version of the X Factor spaceship from the 80s, and you still look at this team and go, why don't they bring back 40 members again? Like, no threat makes sense now for the comic. The comic kind of was wrecked a little bit because there's not a logical world where you had a bunch of Avengers all brought together to tackle any threat and do it with no loss of life and everything else, and then kind of have to go back to, and now it's a small honed team that just does something specific. You can't go back. It's similar to the X-Men. The X-Men, they're trying right now, but the From the Ashes stuff sucks by and large, and part of it sucks. It's like it to the reader doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so Krakoa, they can't live there anymore. So why don't they go? Like they can't just find it. I mean, you've shown us mutants who could literally do anything. You're telling me you don't want to recreate? Like, why wouldn't you go try and recreate resurrection again? Oh, it's because there's some generative disease maybe that happens. Like, it's just too hard to put the toys back in the box once you've scattered them so aggressively. People, the comic readers, have memories. And so they remember that this stuff happened. They remember that the Avengers were this Omega level team that could do anything, traveled into space, unified all of the different galaxies against this Builder's threat. I mean, you had all this stuff, and it doesn't make sense. Even in I'm bouncing back and forth, but you have like over in Avengers, they're like, oh, how are we going to tackle this problem that there's some, or there's some people who need freeing from this Ashen Combine threat that Jen McKay set up. Well, I mean, but if it's that big a threat, why don't you call in like 80 members of the Avengers you have on speed dial? Why are you sending the Black Panther in alone to do this? That doesn't make a lot of sense. No matter how you write it, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And oh, Doom has the Sorcerer Supreme power. Well, this seems like a pretty big deal. Why don't we bring all the full weight of the Marvel universe against him? We did that before. Why aren't we doing it now? If you're the X-Men, over in Jeff Thorne's X-Force book, they're fighting some pretty severe threats and all the rest, and they just killed off Surge. Why aren't the X-Men working to resurrect her? They've done it in the past. Why aren't they bringing the full weight of all of Krakoa to do this? Why these characters just get scattered? That doesn't make any sense. So my argument here is this, and again, it's not entirely a fair one, but it's like, what if, I love Hickman's work. I actually really enjoy his stuff, but I think he ruins comics for the people who follow him. It's a crazy way to look at it. What do you think? Uh, does Hickman just kind of ruin the comics? I mean, you get an enjoyable story, but where do you go from there? And I think we haven't seen writers be able to figure that one out. Anyway, I don't know. Crazy? Not crazy? Let me know. You kind of got a hint of it with Fantastic Four. I mean, he didn't do anything really in Fantastic Four that broke the world exactly. I mean, he did do the whole kind of Doom joins the team, and some of the stuff with the kids and the Future Foundation, everything else, and then what, Matt Fraction followed that run, right? And it's like that just bombed. I think a lot of people blame that on Fraction, was kind of bombing in general at that time in Marvel, but maybe it was like a precursor to what would to come, because the Avengers have not had kind of a big exciting run that everybody got really excited about post Hickman. There just hasn't been one. Aaron's stuff didn't get the attention, the acclaim. It never did. Again, Wade was there, Aaron was there, McKay is there. None of them are rising to that occasion. It's still a little too early to tell with X-Men, but it doesn't feel like it's going to go in, to that level. So anyway, that's my point. So that's my question out to all of you. Being too harsh here, but I'm starting to think, if you put Hickman on a book, you're almost in a way signaling that, whoever follows this book is screwed. I think that's more or less where you land. Anyway, let me know if this has a merit or I'm just being a dumbass. Curious how you take it from that perspective. Yeah, that's it. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.